again, as Ellen mentioned a little bit ago about me, so I am an assistant professor in University of Wisconsin-Madison, and I teach classes on Middle East politics, on gender and politics, and sometimes also classes on research methodology. So what I do, I mostly, I would classify myself as a quantitative scholar. Most of my work is actually on, I do surveys, experiments, analysis of legislative data. So all my stuff, all my work, all my published things are mostly quantitative. So I wonder now, like, I'm pretty sure you're wondering, why are they bringing this quantitative person to talk to us about interviews? That's because I think interviews is a very, very important tool, even for quantitative scholars. So it's not just, I always against this kind of distinction in our discipline that you're either a qualitative or a quantitative scholar. And I think this distinction, you need really to get it out of your head. It's all about your question and what's good for your question. So I am a quantitative scholar, but I would say I never published a paper without some interview work done. So interviews are essential, and I always call them, I see them, and I really think so, as a golden tool. It's a tool that you can use in very, very different ways. So let's start with this kind of mind, with that interviews are not just for qualitative researchers, and it is for everyone who wants to do research, more nuanced research. And I will tell you more about this in the next few slides. So here is what we will do today. So first, I wanna kind of sell to you why interviews are so important, coming from a quantitative scholar, and I really think that it is a very important methodology. And then we will talk about types of interviews. And then I want to focus in particular on semi-structured interviews, because I think most of you, that's what you will end up doing. We try different things, and then we actually go back to the semi-structured interviews. And then we will talk a little bit about getting started on the process. So it's not like you're going to decide today, I want to interview people, and then tomorrow you'll be contacting them. I wish that the world is not that simple, but it's actually a pretty long process before you can go in the field and talk to people. So I will tell you more about this process. And I was with this understanding that every discipline is different and every institution is different, but I will give you more of a general overview how this process look like. And I also talk about the recruitment and selection of interviewees. And I think this is a very important point that you need to bear in mind. And we will talk more about this and why this is the case. And then finally, you will conduct the interviews. And then I will tell you what to do, what not to do in the interviews. And I will tell you about challenges, because the world is not as simple and as straightforward as we know. So there are always challenges that you really need to be prepared for. Don't be like me, getting in the field and then like, oh my God, I did not think about that. So I will tell you exactly the challenges, and this from personal experience after like 10 years of interviewing people in very different countries around the world. So I will tell you a little bit about the challenges and some tips. So I'm not going to just throw the challenges in your face and tell you these are the challenges, but I would also tell you some tips. This is how you can overcome these challenges. And then we will do some suggested readings, which I sent already to you. Ghadir already sent them, not me. And then I will open Q&A for you to, if you have any questions about the readings. And also there are a few points that I did not cover in the slides because of the time, for the sake of time. But I have a list of these points that we can discuss more in the Q&A. So let's start with why interviews. So as I mentioned a little bit ago, so it is a research method that involves you. This is interviewing in general. That's not just semi-structured. So think this is even journalists do interviews. Think about researchers, like interviews, very, very broadly defined, okay? It's a research method that involves you as a researcher asking questions and receiving answers from people. And it's very widely used in the social sciences, and it's a golden tool that can be used for a variety of reasons. So I will tell you how this is not something that you will find in the literature much, but you will find it more based on your own experience and more your own work. For instance, for me, these interviews were very essential for me for theory development. So sometimes you read all these resources and all these papers, and you end up like and especially in our discipline and our field, like Middle East politics, sometimes you feel like these scholars that write on the Middle East, and you read the papers, and then you're like, oh my God, is this Middle East? Like, is this even our region? That does not even look like our. Most of you are smiling now because I'm pretty sure that you've been through this too. Some people write things, and they were like, that's not even what we know about this context. So really, interviews are very important for theory development when you're trying to put in some kind of theoretical framework, you're trying to develop your theory. Interviews are essential for this. So even before you start, you can go to the field. So these are very different ways of using interviews, right? So before you start, you can go in the field, collect some interviews, do some data collection, and then you will kind of help you form what kind of theory you want to develop. There's one way to do it. Other way, you can start with quantitative analysis. So I have all this, like, for instance, I will give you an example from my own work. So I analyze all this legislative data. So I know women focus on this, men focus on that. And then what? So what? Like, what does this mean? What does it mean that women focus on welfare and men focus on infrastructure? What does this mean? Why are they doing this? So you go back to the field and you talk to actually parliamentarians and say, okay, what are these variations? Where are they coming from? And then you would know, yeah, because women focus on these areas because these are the committees or the places where they're allowed to be, and not other areas. So you will find that when you go in the field and kind of understand what is behind your data and quantitative analysis, the research is much, much stronger rather than just you reporting correlations and associations and things from your data that doesn't make it, they're not nuanced and don't make that much theoretical contribution. The third point that I also advocate for interviews, because you can always produce this kind of nuanced, context-relevant theories and research findings. We all know examples from published work that has nothing to do with reality, or even the findings, they don't have really that much a value when we think about the real world. And we already know this from many, many work published in our region and other regions too. So having this kind of interviews also help you kind of produce this very, very context-specific theories. And even if you're doing comparative work, so it's not like I'm just studying Qatar or I'm just studying the UAE, so interviews will be good. No, but actually, even if you're doing comparative work or cross-national analysis, even interviews then are also important. It's not just for a single study, kind of like, for instance, like I did a lot of cross-national 4 or 5 countries papers. I do interviews in only 4 or 5 countries, and I go and I talk to people and I sit down with them. And I understand the patterns in my data. So I want you to broaden the way you think about qualitative interviews. They're from a value perspective and also from a scope perspective. They're not just for single case, single phenomena. I want to talk about this specific point in Tunisia or in Qatar. Think about also how it can be useful for you for building broader theories and also making more generalizable kind of findings. Okay. So this is why I'm here. In this specific point here, I'm just telling you why interviews are important and how you can use them and why they're essential for your work overall. So, and then I want to move to the types of interviews and kind of discuss with you these different formats of interviews. And then we will focus in the rest of the presentation. I want to mainly focus on the semi-structured interviews, but I will give you all the different types, and I will share this presentation with Ghadir if you would like to have it. And I also added some citations for work on the presentation that I found. These studies are really, really interesting, kind of comparing these different formats, and you'll find throughout the presentation if you'd like to go back to these sources. So we have 3 main formats for interviews. The structured. So it's just like a questionnaire that have just open questions, but it's a very, very structured way that you cannot move, like question 1, as if you're asking a public opinion survey. Think about a survey with a preset order, but the only difference is that the questions are open-ended instead of just giving people options to answer. Okay, so and there's nothing here that you can change as you do the interview. The second thing that the other type is the unstructured, which is like an informal conversation, like you having an informal conversation with Miriam or with Abdurrahman, saying, oh, what do you think about this? What do you think about that? Like having very, very unstructured, informal kind of interviews. This is another type of interviews, and you don't have any control over the conversation, right? So you don't direct them to the questions, you don't have the specific hypotheses or themes. Like you let the conversation kind of lead the research findings and the themes themselves. And then we have the third type, which I really want to talk about today, the semi-structured. These have predetermined questions. The order can be modified based on the interviewer's perception and what's most appropriate. For instance, if you're interviewing an elite, so you have a questionnaire for parliamentarians, and if you're interviewing head of the party, for instance, so there's some questions like naturally you are skip, and not like you can change the order, you can change the focus, but overall you will use your instrument, but there is some flexibility in how you can modify the questions during the interviews, and you based on your perception and what is most appropriate. Question wording can be changed and explanations given. Particular questions seem irrelevant with a particular interviewee can be omitted, or additional ones included. So these are the formats of the interviews, but interviews can also kind of vary in the mode. So we have face-to-face interviews. So you're sitting in a room with somebody and you're doing the interviews, and they can happen over the phone as well. And you can do it online through Skype, Zoom, and we saw a lot of this kind of method during COVID, and most of our work was actually over Zoom. So, and these studies that I cite here, they tell you the pros and cons of having an online versus face-to-face versus phone. I think these studies are really, really interesting, kind of comparing the findings from these different modes of interviews. But for the sake of our time, so what is the most common and allows more like a natural kind of flow of the conversation is the face-to-face interviews. And it helps also to build this trust relationship with the interviewee that I will talk more about later. Okay, so now we know why interviews, and we know the different types of the interviews, and then I want to talk a little bit about the semi-structured in particular. So the semi-structured is an open-ended interviews in which researchers identify topics which they want to ask questions of individual participants. So here's how you get started. So first, you will really need to have an interview guide, a questionnaire. And these questionnaires can be a little bit challenging to put together. So the way that I did, not necessarily the best way, but the one way that I did is that I started with themes. So I think that, for instance, the themes of for instance, one of the papers that I'm working on women's legislative behavior. So let me do the first theme on effectiveness, how effective they are. Second theme about what is representation for them? What representation can mean very different things to very different people. How do I represent my constituency? And the other theme is what they actually do, like what kind of requests you receive, what kind of demands do you like always get from your constituents, so that you can. And every theme has its own block of questions. You have like 3-4 questions per theme. So this is one way to do it, and it's easier for you to also arrange it like in your head when you're doing the interviews. Sometimes also, if you have some hypotheses, if you already created hypotheses for your work, you can also structure the questionnaire around the hypotheses. So for instance, women are marginalized in important committees. So now I have, like, this is one of the hypotheses that I have. So I would ask a specific set of questions about what kind of committees you get in, who picks, da, da, da. So you can also structure your questionnaires based on the themes that you have and the hypotheses that you already have. So the generate questions that best capture the main themes in your research. And also one like really helpful tip is to start with broad questions, very open-ended questions before moving to the more specific ones. That will help you also ease kind of the beginning of the interviews, and like there's still like the flow is not as natural as it will be by the end of the interview. So it's always good. Okay, like, what's your name? How did you join when did you join the party? Like very general kind of question, things that doesn't need a lot of like stress from the respondents. So it's something that it can help the flow of the interview. And I found always effective to start with this more broad questions. And also you can formulate follow-up questions and prompts. So for instance, Abdulrahman said something that's really interesting. It's okay, and this is why it's a semi-structured interview. So Abdulsalam said something really interesting, and I really want to know about that. She was like, oh, Abdulrahman, can you tell me more about this? I think this is really, really interesting. So try also to formulate follow-up questions and prompts, either in your questionnaire or as you have the interview going on. And also I found really helpful is to do some background research on the context and the potential interviewee pool. So know your context very well. So if you're interviewing, for instance, an Islamist party leader, know a little bit on the party, what their priorities, what they do, what do you focus on, and you can go in knowing already many of the questions or the answers for your questions that will make your interview much more efficient, and identify the mode of recruitment for the IRB approval. So this kind of a general, why I'm starting with this, because you will need to generate, when you do your IRB approvals, you will need to provide a questionnaire. So, and I will talk more about the IRBs and why they are important. So this kind of a general idea how to get started. Think about the themes, identify the hypotheses, generate questions that mirror the main themes of your research. Start with more broad questions, follow-up questions, and do some background work. So these are kind of a general guidelines before this. You're not in the field yet, okay? We're still getting ready and we're getting started. So the first thing that you will do, so now you have the questionnaires and you have the mode of selection, you did your background research, you did all this kind of preliminary work. Now you need to get approvals. So you need to I know that this is not something that in most Middle East institutions, actually, there are no IRB offices. So these are called the institution review boards. And the requirement to get your interviews approved. But if like, I think some of you are working with European institutions, I think this is a requirement to do the IRBs. And if you're collaborating, so if, for instance, I'm collaborating with Miriam on something, I am in a US institution, Miriam in a MENA-based institution, still you will have to do IRB approvals. So IRB, it's very important that you get familiar with what the IRBs are and the approvals and how to obtain them. And you really need to contact your institutional review board and understand the requirements, because really each discipline is very different. The biology versus anthropology versus political science. It's really the requirements are really different. So understand what are the requirements and what you need to do. And also the requirements for doing domestic research is very different from doing international research. So again, as I mentioned, when you prepare these IRB forms, you will need to submit a questionnaire. That's why your questionnaire need to be ready. And it will ask you for translated versions if the study is conducted in different languages and countries. For instance, when I do work in the Middle East here, my IRB office, I mean, like, this is recorded, whatever. But okay, but they asked me to do all the questionnaires in Arabic. So I was like, and they don't have Arabic speaking staff. But anyway, but I have to submit all the. It's tedious, like to generate all these kind of translated versions of every single questionnaire. But it's a requirement. So you will have to prepare them and submit them as you go. And then you prepare a consent form for the interviewees to outline their rights and risks. So, and I can also, if those who are doing this specific method, I can share with you some samples of the consent forms and also a sample questionnaire. I'm happy to also provide you with these samples, can make it clear in your mind. So you prepare this consent form for the interviews that outlines the rights and risks with conducting the interviews. You have to detail who you are, who's the institution, why are you doing the research, and you give their consent to be interviewed with you. Okay, so this is like, I know that this applies to many of you, even if your institution does not require IRB approvals. Most of the top academic journals, they require IRB approvals. So even if your institution does not require you to do them, if you want to publish this paper in an academic journal, the editors will ask you for the IRBs. So I would do them, find a way to do them through an international institution or through my own institution, but find a way to do them. And they're also really these approvals are very important and they're the right thing to do because it kind of trains you to how to do the interviews and how to deal with ethical issues, how to minimize risk. Like, they are the right thing to do. So if there's an opportunity for you to do these IRB approvals, I think that would be really, really great. Okay, so now we prepared our questionnaires. We obtained our approvals. These are like an ideal world. And approval and IRB approvals are very, can take some time. So you really need to be prepared for some time, like 4 to 6 weeks to get your approvals ready. So budget in time, because IRB approvals and IRB offices, sometimes they like to take their sweet time. So be ready for good 4 to 6 weeks of time to wait for their approval, because you can go before you can go in the field. Okay, now I'm going to recruit and select my interviews finally. You have to get your IRBs, and then you can start contacting and recruiting your subjects. So actually, our institutions they do not allow us to contact people until the approvals are in. So it's not like you submit your application and you start recruiting. No, you can't. You have to wait for them to approve. So first, you will have to start inviting people to participate by email, by phone, by flyers, by face-to-face. And you really need to be very careful when you're selecting your participants. Think about your themes, think about your hypotheses, and then base your selection based on what you really want to know. Try to maximize as much as you can the efficiency of your interviews. They're time consuming. They take so much effort, and they also take so much time to transcribe, which we will talk later about. So you really need to pick people that will really be helpful for you in your developing your research project. So one way of doing this, and I know that I think we all all of us share the same experience, that we work in very high security, high surveillance kind of contexts. So I mostly rely on snowballing as an effective recruitment method, especially when you're working in low trust contexts where people really don't want to talk to foreigners, because I am Marwa, but I'm still a foreigner because I'm in a U.S. institution, right? So why is this person coming from a U.S. institution want to come to talk to us? So there is the best way to really do this is to snowball. So I find a couple of people that I know, that I trust, and they know me well, and then they start connecting me. There are drawbacks for this, and we can discuss more about. But for you to get a good number of people to talk to, I think you will need to start with one or two leads, and then they can facilitate your access to other people. So this is getting access is one of the major challenges that I will talk more about, and think about how we can improve access. One also way that worked for me is I send them, again, working in an authoritarian setting is very, very different from working in a democratic setting. So sometimes interviewees really want to see your questionnaires. They want to know what you're going to ask them before they talk to you. If you're going to ask them about, the regime is so repressive, and you're like, you need to tell me what is this, the monarchy is doing here and there, nobody will meet with you. So sometimes they would want to see these interviews, their questionnaires, and look at the consent forms before you meet them. And then after they feel more comfortable answering, they can actually get back to you and agree to participate. And also you need to give them a clear idea where and when the interview will take place. So don't I want to meet you, and then you just leave it open. They give them where and when you would be at. The one way I do it before I go, for instance, Morocco, before I go to Jordan, I would email people a month in advance. Okay, I'm thinking come in October. Are you available? And then, yeah, but text me the night off, right? Why are you texting me a month in advance? So, or sending me an email a month in advance. So anyway, just try as much as you can to be precise and find the right place, right time, and when you recruit and select your interviewees. Okay, so finally now we are conducting the interview. So now I'm sitting down with Miriam, and I'm finally doing the interview. And now Miriam is sitting in front of me. So the first thing that I would do is that I would explain the purpose and the nature of the study to the interview. Even if you send the materials before, sometimes they don't read them. So explain what is the study is about. Why are you doing this study? How did I know you? Because this is actually always a question that I get asked in the beginning. How did you know me? Right? So this is something that's always this suspicion, how did I know you? Somebody told me about you. So I'm not mukhabarat or anything trying to come after you. So anyway, so you always want to know why you selected them. So say something about yourself and why you're conducting the interview. Sometimes saying less is better. So for instance, I study women in politics. I don't have to talk about my work on authoritarianism and repression and there are things that you don't really need to. It does not need to do. This project is specifically about women in legislative assemblies. You don't have to talk about tolerance and Islamists and authoritarianism, all the things that you're working on. It doesn't matter, okay? Doesn't matter for the specific project. And also make sure to read the consent form before you start and getting their approval, written or verbal approval before recording. So you need, one, they need to approve the consent form. Two, they need to approve that you record them. And not everybody actually agreed to record them being recorded. So I got the weirdest request when I was in Kuwait in January doing interviews. The person I was interviewing somebody, and I asked them to record them, and then they said, "Can I record you too?" And I was like, "Okay, whatever." So he actually recorded me. I told him, I am trained to how to use this information. I am trained how to store them. And I am trained how to deal ethically with this information. You don't. So you wanna record me, but I'm just telling you, you don't have the needed training. He was like, okay, smarty, I'm still recording it. Okay. So be ready. Then some people will say no. Some people will say okay. Some people say we're gonna record you back. So that's an option. So give them also the choice. And this is really important. And really, when we're doing the interviews, sometimes we get so excited in the moment and we forget to do these things, but they're actually very, very important. So give them the choice to remain anonymous or to be identified in your project. And this is an important thing that some of them would like most of the people that I interviewed said, yes, please put our names in the book. We really want to be in, like, our name to be mentioned. Others are not that excited. Like, it's definitely no, we don't want our name to be even in the transcripts. So you have to ask them about like whether they want to be in there or not. One thing that I learned that I did not know when I started is that people promise you things and then things come up. This is life. So for instance, you can email them and they promise you 2 hours of interviews or an hour and a half. You get to their office and then they had like a meeting that just popped up, especially if you're dealing with elites. Their time is not really that flexible. So the one thing that I started doing the last round after I learned my lesson is before I start, of course, I say hello, but I just say, okay, so how much time you have? Because I don't want to start the interviews and talk about the general things. And then I realized 20 minutes in that actually they only have 30 minutes and I just don't get to the questions that I really care about. So one thing that I learned that I get in their offices and I say, how much time you have for these interviews, so I can also budget the way that I ask my questions. And also, so you really need to also develop this kind of trusting relationship with your interviewees. So do not get in kind of like looking like nervous or like trying to like get them like to be like skeptical. Well, what is this kind of researcher? What are they doing? Like try it as much as you can just to ease their concerns. I was like, I'm just a researcher. I'm just doing this project, and this is like my business card. This is like this is some of the works that I did, and like try as much as you can to kind of build this kind of a more trusting kind of relationship. I know it's hard and 30-45 minutes to build this relationship, but I think there are things that there are tricks we can do, or like not tricks, strategies that we can do that can actually alleviate this kind of issues and the tension that happens in the beginning, especially by the beginning of the interviews. I know that these are semi-structured interviews, and the questionnaires, you have a questionnaire that you really want to get to and like get them to answer the things that you really care about. But you really also need to give them the opportunity to share their experiences and what's really important for them. It cannot be like a mechanical kind of thing. Question. That becomes really, really artificial, and they become nervous, and they become very, very wary of the whole process very fast. So you also need to give them some time to budget in sometimes. And the more you do the interviews, the more you will know how to kind of to balance this. So kind of going back to our questions and focus on the themes and the hypotheses, and also giving them a chance to express themselves and how they feel about things. Not necessarily how did she feels about like doing like family visits or whatever, but at least something that would be like relevant to the research or thing that that is important for your own work. Okay, challenges. Now we are in the challenges. Access. So access is an issue, especially in autocracies and regimes and places where people don't trust each other much, okay? Because of many reasons that we don't have to talk about now. So again, as I mentioned in the beginning, the best way to do this is to know somebody or two or relevant people, then they will connect you to more people. I found this to be the most efficient. You're sitting in their office and they're texting somebody, and they're 5 minutes later you have an appointment with them. So, or calling somebody and right away you have another interview. So it's really important for you to kind of find 2 or 3 focal points, and then these will be like really your leads to access more people. Also, some of the challenges that you deal with difficult and emotionally sensitive topics, and I think this is something that sometimes, for instance, when I do interviews with some of activists, for instance, in the region, they would talk about moments of their imprisonments or the repression or whatever. So sometimes becomes really difficult, like this emotional moments where you try to. It's hard for you to avoid in your interviews. but you just have to be trained about how to deal with these difficult situations. And I think the SAGE reading that was required for today, they do have a nice table of strategies. I think that can be a really. I'm not going to repeat them. I think you already saw them. So I think they have a good list of strategies that you can use. One thing that I also found in my so most of these challenges are not really from that table, because I try to get you more of what's the real world look like. But also I think this table is really, really helpful. Table 5.1. So also the gender dynamics. So, and this is something that I encountered a lot in my work, where being a female researcher and also being a foreigner, kind of in their eyes, I'm a foreigner. No matter how Egyptian I look, or like how Egyptian I talk, I'm still very foreigner for them. So I think one of the gender kind of dynamic that I encountered, especially like interviewing male elites, is that kind of this kind of like, I'm gonna mansplain things to you, right? So no matter like you have a PhD, you're a professor, whatever, and this guy with a diploma, he wants to sit down and tell and mansplain to you how the world works. So these situations are sometimes they're very difficult to handle, like where you're saying and it's really hard with some personalities. You really cannot, I cannot like look dumb and just sit down and listen to him like mansplaining to me. So and I think also, I mean, like me and Ellen, we had another really interesting experience of mansplaining things to us, but I'm not gonna mention this experience now. So these are some of the gender kind of dynamics that can be really hard when you're doing work in the region, especially in conservative kind of settings, where women have like the traditional roles of women are some still prevalent. To some extent. So that becomes a little bit tricky when you deal with, you don't want to offend people, but at the same time, it becomes like you really need to learn how to deal with this in a very, very strategic way. Also, women in particular in the field, they face issues of harassment, and there's lots of like, you cannot finish the interview. Somebody is like hitting on you, or something like, okay, how can I finish the interview this way? So at some point, you need to learn when there is a point where you really need to exit, and that's not going to continue. I cannot continue the interview. So again, so there's some, I think for being a woman is not a bad thing when you're doing interviews in conservative and also very high security authoritarian regimes, because you always think of women as not as threatening as men. So that's not a bad thing, that being a woman, but it also has other issues that you would really need to be trained and anticipate and learn how to deal with. Okay, so and a couple of times I was doing interviews, and then there were two guys that were pretty inappropriate. By the middle of the interview, I really had to stop the interview and leave, and just like, I cannot continue the interview. So you really need to learn when to stop the interview. And well, loss of the contact, whatever, but you are more important. Your safety is more important. So the other challenge that I assigned a suggested reading for you to do is the poor quality interviews. So sometimes you spend all this time, all this effort, getting all these people like to get you this appointment, and then you do this interview, and then really it's not giving you any information for your research. It's not really, they're not providing anything like this, like really relevant. Or so really, how do I judge the interviews and their qualities and the quality? So I assigned this suggested reading. I really hope that you read it. It gives you exactly what is a failed interview, and it kind of thinks about how to deal with this failed interview, and are there any failed interviews? So how to think about quality. So I really encourage you to think more about the quality, the issues of quality. And one thing that I did with this, the really poor quality interviews, is that I actually run them many times, and I try to kind of find out what went wrong. So is it me, the way I asked the question, or is it about the education background of the person in front of me? He's not understanding, or she's not understanding what I'm saying. Like, get in a very deep kind of like reflect on the interview, so it's not repeated again. So try to at least get them as a learning experience for you, that what do I need to avoid that I did wrong in this interview. So poor quality interviews are very common. Don't get discouraged when you have an interview or two that are not really like helping with any of your hypotheses or your themes. Another thing also that is problematic when interviewees are not telling the truth, are providing misleading information. And this is something that is also, for many reasons, especially in autocratic regimes, and so there's so many reasons: security issues, surveillance. Sometimes, sadly, this is the case. So one way that I dealt with this, that I actually asked the same question the same way to different people to verify the fact, at least the factual part of it. So you're not writing your project and citing all this like qualitative data and then it's all wrong. So at least try to verify from different people when you feel you know your field, you know the material better than anybody else. So at least try to verify from different sources and from actual papers or whatever you have to make sure that you are not citing wrong information. And also, like sometimes you have this problematic interview location. It's just too noisy. It's gonna hear to other people. Or as many times I was talking to, for instance, an Islamists in Jordan, and then we're sitting in a cafe, and they would get so anxious, and then we're looking, and everybody else is looking at us. So because hearing what we're saying. So also sometimes this interview locations can be very problematic. That is, people can hear what you're saying, or it's just you cannot. It's not the too much noise. So again, there are always ways to do this. You can meet in quiet places. You can get them to the lobbies or in your hotels where you're staying. There's so many ways, or meeting them in their offices, although there's some distractions there too. And the last challenge that I want to talk about also is the surveillance and the security issues. When this is something that we all face in our research, having all this security and constraints and mukhabarat. One time I was in Jordan, I was actually doing an interviews, and the Uber driver told on me. So it's something that we all face in our. I was going to meet one of the opposition, people, and then the Uber driver actually reported me. So it's amazing how it's really and this is something that I will tell you more about, and amazing how things can go wrong very fast. So and how you really need to be prepared. Do not wait for the moment to come and then think about the plan B. So, and I'm pretty sure I saw that in the first week you were got a lecture on ethics and safety in research sites, and I think that was a great point. It's very important that you learn the safe. How to do safe research and how to have very real, non-imagined ones, very real exit plans. So when things go wrong, you really need to go. Do not even think twice. Nope, get out. So we will talk more here. So practical tips. So let me give you, I think I give you enough challenges. So let me give you some tips. So the first tip that I learned, again, after a long time in the field, listen carefully and prompt only when necessary. Let them talk. Stop talking. And that was really hard for me because I talk all the time. I lecture my student. I talk all the time. And it was so hard for me just not to lecture my interviewees, right? So just be quiet and listen, okay? And only talk when there's a clarifying questions. So I just oh, you said that is this happen in 2011? And if there's something you just want to make sure that happened, or only when necessary. You don't need to say your opinion about every single thing they're saying. Try hard, try to not to. One thing that I also learned, and I really hope that you learn as well, is to be flexible. So I get in and doing this work on legislatures in the Middle East, many of us, thinking that these legislatures are just so useless. They do nothing. They have like no policy outcomes. People just sit there to get immunity and just to get all these benefits and get access, and they're just useless. So, and I was wrong. I was actually wrong. And they have different functions. They're not similar. It's true because they're not at like the Congress, they're not like democratic institutions, but they are there for other functions that are important as well for the regime and for the voters. So be flexible and listen and be ready to change your ideas when you hear more and when you know more from your interviewees, especially those who lived the experiences. So just be flexible and be ready to change the way you think about problems and your questions. And I think this really helped me. Like, it's not like I'm going into these interviews to prove that my theories are right. I'm going in to prove that my hypotheses work. No, this is one way of thinking about it, but also an even better way to think about it is to be flexible and to be ready to change the way you're thinking about these questions. One also thing that I learned is to avoid long questions and long questionnaires. So long questions, you lose the participants. So you'll keep on repeating the question, wasting time of the interview, and they're still going to answer the last 2 or 3 words that you said. So avoid long questions. You don't need to have long questions. And also avoid asking leading questions. So what are the leading questions? Questions that are framed in a particular way to elicit responses, to confirm preconceived notions. Don't ask them, questions in a way. If like legislatures and autocracies are useless. Don't you think so? This is a leading question, right? The right way to ask the question, what do you think about the role of legislature in Jordan, in Morocco? Instead of giving them kind of the lead in what way to answer the question. Avoid questions with jargon. These are people yes, they're elites, maybe they're activists, whatever, but they don't necessarily know your academic terms and how you describe things. Just avoid the jargon. You don't need that. So you just confuse them. And you're not gonna really get what you're trying to get from them, because they're gonna be thinking about, what does this word even mean? Okay, so avoid this jargon, you don't need it. And also avoid bias. So, and again, this is kind of asking leading question, for instance, is a kind of bias. So try to avoid, and it's really hard. Like, it's very hard to like, for instance, when I sit down with somebody and then they start talking to me about how, US democracy is just useless. And really, who needs a democracy? And we are so happy with our, we're rich, we have the money. Like, I'm talking about one of the Gulf countries, right? We're rich, we have the money, who needs a democracy? So I can answer back and say, well, your system has so many problems, and we can have an exchange on values of democracy, right? But that's not they're gonna get you anywhere, right? So just try to, you just be neutral. You're not approving what they're saying. You're not picking a fight with them about their views, but you're just being neutral and continue the interview and get as much information from them as you can. Again, the other thing that is also practical is to record your interviews. It's ideal to record, and you have to have the IRB approval and the interview approval to record, but also be prepared if they say no. Don't just go there with your recorder or your phone, and then they say no, and then now you're trying to like figure out what you're going to do. Just be prepared if they say no. The other thing also that is you covered in the first lecture about how not to cause harms to your interviewees. It is not cool that we interview people, and then when we leave back to our countries and they get in trouble. That is not ethical. That's not the right thing to do. So you really need to, it's not just about you and your safety, it's also about the safety of and I think this should be a priority. This has to be a priority more than your own safety, that the safety of your interview, because you can get out, they can't. So do not cause harm. If there's a 0.005% chance that they will get hurt because of the interview. Don't do it. You don't need them. And also, as I said, have a plan B. Think about if things go wrong, you really need to have to be prepared for this. Okay, so these are my practical tips. Okay. I think here's it. Yeah, my practical tips for you, and these are the suggested readings that I shared, as Ghadir shared with you. There are two more points that I would like to talk about on the Q&A, something like, and which was raised and also in the readings, how many interviews do I need? So this is an important also thing that we can talk about. And also, how do I analyze this data? So now I have all this interview data, what I'm going to do with it, how to analyze it. So I kind of, I think I did more than the lecture time, and I'm sorry for this. So I will need to stop, and then we can start the Q&A by these 2 points or other points that you'd like to talk about. I am very, very happy to answer any question.